We join our group of misfit adventurers as they exit the Peace Warden's Keep in Rycroft, having survived an expedition into Sandrak Highmount's tower. Rewarded with gold as well as room and board for the night at the Crofters' Cup Tavern, they decided to make their way straight there, knowing they would be meeting with Lady Rycroft the following morning. It was mid-afternoon as they entered the tavern, a full-sized building with the bar and furniture of a suitable height for the largely halfling population of the town. It had a slightly odd impressionist feel to it. The tavern was deserted, save for Wendell, the barman. He was in his usual place behind the bar, wiping the surface with the same filthy rag, potentially cleaning it, but potentially just spreading the stickiness around a bit. As the group entered, his warm smile of greeting turned to a look of concern as he spotted Bjorn. The dwarf, focused solely on getting alcohol, did not notice this. Wendell poured out 5 full-sized tankards of ale. Callie was paying and requested the finest. This being a smaller town, they only had 1 ale, but it was decent enough. Cora decided to quiz Wendell a little more about Gladys. Cora, being a local, was well aware of the female half-ogre who ran the tavern. Wendell quietly told her that Gladys was a little upset with Bjorn. The conversation was interrupted by some loud footsteps. The door between the bar and the kitchen swung loudly open. In the doorway stood a statuesque woman with green skin, about 9 feet tall and muscular. On her head was a blonde wig of luscious feminine curls. Her eyelids were smeared with blue eyeshadow, and the red colour on her lips could have been lipstick, or it could have been blood. She wore a voluminous pink dress which appeared to have been a tent in a former life, the seams straining to contain the stout, muscular form. This was Gladys. By the laws of physics, a woman of her particular build should have been unable to squeeze through the doorway, but somehow she managed it. Seeing Bjorn, her eyes narrowed. He looked at her, unsure quite who she was or what he had done, but she was evidently displeased. He could only stare at her, bewildered, as she strode over, picked him up with ease, carried him to the door, and drop-kicked him out into the street, yelling that he was not welcome as the door slammed behind her. Whilst Bjorn picked himself up and dusted off his plate mail, Cora approached Gladys, who was now crying angry tears. Cora attempted to hug Gladys's ankle to comfort her as, between sobs, the half-ogre revealed that Bjorn, who had said she was the most beautiful creature he'd ever seen, had snuck out of her room at night. He'd promised her a ring, and she was devastated by his actions. Large, long snot trails dangled precariously from her cavernous nostrils as she reached for Wendell's rag, using it to wipe her face. Her makeup was now more like a bad Braveheart than Marilyn Monroe as she flung the rag with a splat back onto the bar, disappearing into the kitchen. Wendell carefully picked it up, wringing it out distastefully before once more wiping the bar, adding salty tears and snot to the mix. Asher and Callie watched the scene with amusement, drinking their beers and wondering just how inebriated Bjorn had been. The group then made their way outside to find Bjorn, Asher taking the 4 room keys Wendell had set out on the bar for them. Callie filled Bjorn in on what he had supposedly done. Bjorn, still unable to recall events, decided he needed to find a way to apologise to Gladys in the hope he wouldn't find himself banned from the only premises selling booze in the area. The party headed for Bouldergrum's Bits and Bobs. The general goods store was small but well supplied with the basics. Behind the counter, a stout, red-haired male dwarf leaned. Bjorn headed straight for him to inquire whether there were any flowers he could purchase. "No," came the response, then a snicker as the dwarf realised Bjorn was the one who had upset Gladys. Word spreads quickly in small towns. Grindel called for his wife, Ecclefeckin, and she informed Bjorn that if he was after an apology gift, he'd best be trying the cake shop. He asked if anywhere had flowers, and she replied that the temple usually had some, as the floral arranging within the town could become quite competitive. She also made it known to Bjorn that dwarves are contractually obliged to speak with bad Scottish accents, but he was prepared to take the risk. Zinna, always drawn towards anything shiny, attempted to slip a crowbar from the shelf. Grindel did not notice, but Ecclefechin did, and suggested that the group should leave. As she ushered them from the premises, she called out in an extra thick Scottish burr, "Do come again!" and shut the door. Zinna, her ears drooping in dismay, was gently admonished that it was not a good idea to look at stuff with her hands. They then walked the short distance to the temple. The temple of Ager was small and fairly unimpressive. The interior was simple and bare, other than a few vases with some lavish flowers in them. Harvest Keeper Clutie stood at the far end, his tautol form draped in robes, his back to the group, giving the impression of a headless egg. Bjorn, for some reason, had been expecting there to be a gift shop with flowers for sale, and could not bring himself to take from a temple. Cora, who was of slightly more ambiguous morals, snuck in and grabbed one of the more spectacular arrangements, sneaking out with it unnoticed. Whilst Bjorn did not condone the action, he was nevertheless grateful. Armed with the flowers, the group returned to the Crofter's Cup. As they entered, it was now a little busier, some of the halfling workers having finished for the day. Wendell, still with his rag behind the bar, was now joined by Sorrel as she flitted from table to table, balancing plates, bowls, tumblers and tankards as if it were an art form. All eyes turned to the group, Bjorn now the centre of attention as they settled in to watch the show. He strode up to the bar, asking for Gladys. Sorrel deftly disappeared into the kitchen, returning shortly. A few moments later the door was flung wide and there stood Gladys. Her attempts to repair her makeup after her earlier outburst had only made her appearance even more daunting. Bjorn held out the flowers and, seeing them, Gladys broke into a wide and terrifyingly toothless grin. She plucked the flowers from Bjorn, tucked him under her free arm, and the others could only watch as she strode off with the plate-armoured dwarf. The other four passed the time drinking and eating before adjourning to their rooms. Callie double-checked he would not be close to where Gladys had Bjorn, as he did not wish to be disturbed, and he was assured by Wendell that Gladys did not go upstairs. Whilst they had done their best to reinforce the building, it was still too risky. Asher and Callie did their best to get comfortable in their halfling-sized beds. Cora, being a halfling herself, was quite content, and Zinna made a nest with the bedding into which she could burrow to sleep. All took a long rest, though Bjorn did not have the most peaceful of nights. He awoke the next morning in bed with Gladys, her loud snores reverberating as a pool of drool collected on the pillow next to her open mouth. Her morning breath was quite something, but Bjorn was of a strong enough constitution to withstand a goodbye kiss as he made his way to find the rest of his group. The four others were already gathered downstairs, a hearty breakfast accompanied by tankards of mead. Callie bet Asher that Bjorn would be limping when he entered. Bjorn strode in as confidently as he could. No limp. Wendell had 3 tankards of ale waiting for him by the time he reached the bar, throwing him a sympathetic look as he downed 2 of them and took the 3rd over to the group. After their meal, they ventured back to the temple in the hopes of acquiring some healing potions before their meeting with Lady Rycroft. Cora picked some flowers as she went to replace those she had taken. A low roll saw her gathering a lovely bouquet of nettles, thorns, and other assorted weeds, a few of which may have been poisonous. At 50 gold each, the party could not afford the healing potions, but Harvest Keeper Clutie said he could exchange one if they cleaned the windows. A half-elf named Alistair had recently done a very good job, but they could do with being gone over again. Asher, aided by Zinna, got to work, and after an hour the glass was sparkling, and Asher was in possession of a vial of red liquid. Cora had fallen asleep whilst listening to Clutie's sermon, or at least the first two lines, which he kept repeating after losing his place and restarting. She gained the benefits of a short rest, and they made their way to the manor house. Being a small town, Rycroft Manor was not as luxurious as some noble dwellings, but it was still a cut above the more common farmhouses and cottages. A maid greeted them, leading them through a homely yet lovely hallway into a drawing room, where a small table held a selection of treats and drinks. Zinna was warned not to look with her hands, and put her little paws into imaginary pockets to demonstrate that she wouldn't. Two women entered the room. Lady Blaise Rycroft, a well-dressed halfling with red hair, and Lady Lauren Rycroft, her half-elven wife. It was Blaise who had requested the party come, having heard from Captain Malone that they had been successful in their foray into Sandrak's tower. There had been goblin corpses turning up in the outskirts of Willowfen Forest, animals going missing, and a few other strange goings-on, with the Peace Wardens currently not equipped to deal with it, and Silverhaven not considering it important enough to look into. Blaise offered the group 25 gold each if they could take a look, either resolving whatever was causing the issue or coming back with information that would enable her to take action. Zinna, having been living in Willowfen, had stumbled across a couple of goblin corpses, but had not seen what had killed them. It was this disturbance that had caused her to seek refuge in Rycroft. The group set off. As they passed by Boulder Grum's bits and bobs, Zinna slipped in, putting some money on the counter and dragging out a crowbar. Callie began to admonish her, but she told him she had paid for it. Crowbar safely stowed in a bag, they made their way towards the forest. It wasn't long before the ground became rough and overgrown, the trees and undergrowth rapidly becoming thicker. Bjorn tried to slash a path through with his great axe, but his shorter dwarven stature meant that he was largely ineffectual. Zinna took a rope and parkoured through the trees, her high vantage point enabling her to see a less obscured route. Cora was able to use her druidic senses to lead them deeper into Willowfen. Asher, being a ranger, was able to navigate the group past any potential hazards or less than friendly wildlife. They trekked through the forest, the thick trees eventually giving way to a bit of a clearing. The group had stumbled upon an abandoned campsite, the remains of a long cold fire and decaying tents, one red, one white, and one a shade of blue-green. Asher was able to use his survival skills to determine that the camp had been left in a hurry, but it had been a few months ago. Any tracks or signs of why or how the occupants had left had been lost to time and weather. The group inspected the tents, a series of low rolls meaning that they found little, though Zinna did find 3 usable arrows and a rotting bedroll. Callie noticed some cobwebs amongst the trees, but no sign of any cocoons or spiders. Faced with a narrow path to the north or a wider one to the west, they chose to head west, Callie using his background knowledge to know where the direction of fresh water would be. I wonder, what might have lain to the north? Cora and Asher moved as stealthily as they could through the trees, but Bjorn and Callie strode in confidently, both in plate mail and less than stealthy at the best of times. Zinna hung back a little. Some of the vegetation nearby began to shift and move, 5 vine blights emerging to attack. Cora and Asher were each able to take a shot, the blights not having detected them as they passed, homing in instead on the louder 2 party members. Cora missed with her magic stone and Asher hit with his arrow. The first blight cast Entangle, causing a circle of ground around it to sprout roots and vines, making it difficult terrain. Asher was just caught within it. A second one struck out at Bjorn, grappling him with its winding tendrils. Cora used her scimitar to strike at the one nearest to her, wounding it. Up next, a second blight struck out and grappled Bjorn. Callie moved up to flank with the restrained dwarf, hitting a blight with his sword for a decent amount of damage. Bjorn was able to break the hold of the first blight, but found himself still firmly grasped by the second. Another blight struck out at Asher, wounding him. Asher retaliated, then backed out of range while Zinna fired her short bow at the blight beside Cora, hitting it. The next two blights struck out at Bjorn, rending him unconscious. Cora and Zinna made short work of the blight they were both attacking, Zinna finishing it off while Asher made a tactical retreat to fire from the tree line after casting his hunter's mark. With Bjorn down, the blights turned their attention to Callie, one hitting him, but the other missing, flailing wildly. Bjorn failed a death save, but thankfully Cora was able to cast Cure Wounds, bringing him back to consciousness. Asher took down a second blight whilst the rest of his party did their best to strike the moving shrubs and avoid being hit themselves. Callie was the next to land a killing blow, cleaving a stump in half. Cora wild-shaped into a wolf, grabbing one with her bite attack and worrying it for a significant amount of damage, Zinna finishing it off for her. Asher killed the fifth and final vine blight, and the group paused to catch their breath. As the imminent danger was past, they felt a renewed strength running through them as they all levelled up. Cora, previously a moon druid, became a druid of the stars instead. I can be nice. Sometimes. We will see where their adventure will take them next, and whether they will discover all of the secrets there are within Willowfen, or if they will leave some untouched, perhaps for another mortal to stumble across.